Hello, lovelies. One of my most favorite books in the world is Wuthering Heights, written by Emily Bronte in 1847. She was the lesser-known Bronte sister, and this was her only novel, published a year before her death of tuberculosis at the age of 21. One of these days, I plan to narrate the whole book, probably on my other channel, but for you, my lovelies, I'd like to narrate parts of an early chapter where the introductory narrator of the story encounters the ghost of one of the main characters. It's a very powerful scene and always stood out for me. Wuthering Heights was never thought of as horror, and indeed it's not. However, besides the ghostly chapter, it presents some very horrific themes, like cruelty and how love, or love thwarted, can twist a person. For me, the raw passion in this book has always been very moving. The chapter I'm going to read from is Chapter 3, at least my copy of it. Our narrator, Mr. Lockwood, has just rented the grand estate at Thrushcross Grange in the English moors, a very isolated bit of countryside, and he's just made a visit to his landlord, Heathcliff, the master of the neighboring house named Wuthering Heights. He finds his host and the others who live there to be strange and not very friendly, but he's snowed in and must spend the night there. After being shown to a room that nobody sleeps in, he finds some books that were written in by a girl named Catherine Earnshaw, as well as her name scratched into the wall. After some frightening dreams, he and we later learn the whole story of Catherine and Heathcliff. I'll begin where Mr. Lockwood finds that he was awoken from his first nightmare by a tree branch hitting his window. I listened doubtingly an instant, detected the disturber, then turned and dozed and dreamt again. If possible, still more disagreeably than before. This time I remembered I was lying in the oak closet, and I heard distinctly the gusty wind and the driving of the snow. I heard also the fir bough repeat its teasing sound, and ascribed it to the right cause. But it annoyed me so much that I resolved to silence it, if possible, and I thought I rose and endeavored to unhasp the casement. The hook was soldered into the staple, a circumstance observed by me when awake, but forgotten. "I must stop it nevertheless," I muttered, knocking my knuckles through the glass and stretching an arm out to seize the importunate branch, instead of which my fingers closed on the fingers of a little ice-cold hand. The intense horror of nightmare came over me. I tried to draw back my arm, but the hand clung to it, and a most melancholy voice sobbed, "Let me in! Let me in!" "Who are you?" I asked, struggling meanwhile to disengage myself. "Catherine Linton," it replied shiveringly. Why did I think of Linton? I had read Earnshaw 20 times for Linton. "I'm come home. I'd lost my way on the moor." As it spoke, I discerned obscurely a child's face looking through the window. Terror made me cruel, and finding it useless to attempt shaking the creature off, I pulled its wrist onto the broken pane and rubbed it to and fro till the blood ran down and soaked the bedclothes. Still it wailed, "Let me in," and maintained its tenacious gripe, almost maddening me with fear. "How can I?" I said at length. "Let me go, if you want me to let you in." The fingers relaxed. I snatched mine through the hole, hurriedly piled the books up in a pyramid against it, and stopped my ears to exclude the lamentable prayer. I seemed to keep them closed above a quarter of an hour, yet the instant I listened again, there was the doleful cry moaning on. "Begone!" I shouted. "I'll never let you in, not if you beg for 20 years. "It is 20 years, mourned the voice. 20 years. I've been away for 20 years. Thereat began a feeble scratching outside, and the pile of books moved as if thrust forward. I tried to jump up, but could not stir a limb, and so yelled aloud in a frenzy of fright. To my confusion, I discovered the yell was not ideal. Hasty footsteps approached my chamber door. Somebody pushed it open with a vigorous hand, and a light glimmered through the squares at the top of the bed. I sat shuddering yet, and wiping the perspiration from my forehead. The intruder appeared to hesitate, and muttered to himself. At last he said in a half-whisper, plainly not expecting an answer, "Is anyone here?" I considered it best to confess my presence, for I knew Heathcliff's accents, and feared he might search further if I kept quiet. With this intention, I turned and opened the panels. I shall not soon forget the effect my action produced. Heathcliff stood near the entrance in his shirt and trousers, with the candle dripping over his fingers, and his face as white as the wall behind him. The first creak of the oak startled him like an electric shock. The light leaped from his hand to a distance of some feet, and his agitation was so extreme that he could hardly pick it up. "It is only your guest, sir," I called out, desirous to spare him the humiliation of exposing his cowardice further. "I had the misfortune to scream in my sleep, owing to a frightful nightmare. I'm sorry I disturbed you." "Oh, God confound you, Mr. Lockwood. I wish you were at the—" commenced my host, setting the candle on a chair because he found it impossible to hold it steady. "And who showed you up to this room?" he continued, crushing his nails into his palms and grinding his teeth to subdue the maxillary convulsions. "Who was it? I've a good mind to turn them out of the house this moment." "It was your servant, Zillah," I replied, flinging myself on the floor and rapidly resuming my garments. "I should not care if you did, Mr. Heathcliff. She richly deserves it. I suppose that she wanted to get another proof that the place was haunted at my expense. Well, it is, swarming with ghosts and goblins. You have reason in shutting it up, I assure you. No one will thank you for a doze in such a den." "What do you mean?" asked Heathcliff. "And what are you doing? Lie down and finish out the night since you are here. But for heaven's sake, don't repeat that horrid noise. Nothing could excuse it unless you were having your throat cut." "If the little fiend had got in at the window, she probably would have strangled me," I returned. "I'm not going to endure the persecutions of your hospitable ancestors again. Was not the Reverend James Branderham akin to you on the mother's side? And that minx, Catherine Linton, or Earnshaw, or however she was called, she must have been a changeling, wicked little soul. She told me she had been walking the earth these 20 years. A just punishment for her mortal transgressions, I've no doubt." Scarcely were those words uttered when I recollected the association of Heathcliff's with Catherine's name in the book, which had completely slipped from my memory till thus awakened. I blushed at my inconsideration, but without showing further consciousness of the offense, I hastened to add, "The truth is, sir, I passed the first part of the night in—" Here I stopped afresh. I was about to say perusing these old volumes. Then it would have revealed my knowledge of their written as well as their printed contents, so correcting myself, I went on, "in spelling over the names scratched on that window ledge, a monotonous occupation calculated to set me asleep, like counting or—" "What can you mean by talking in this way to me?" thundered Heathcliff with savage vehemence. How dare you, under my roof? God, he's mad to speak so." And he struck his forehead with rage. I did not know whether to resent this language or pursue my explanation, but he seemed so powerfully affected that I took pity and proceeded with my dreams, affirming I had never heard the appellation of Catherine Linton before, but reading it often over produced an impression which personified itself when I had no longer my imagination under control. Heathcliff gradually fell back into the shelter of the bed as I spoke, finally sitting down almost concealed behind it. I guessed, however, by his irregular and intercepted breathing that he struggled to vanquish an excess of violent emotion. Not liking to show him that I heard the conflict, I continued my toilette rather noisily, looking at my watch, and soliloquized on the length of the night. Not 3 o'clock yet. I could have taken oath it had been 6. Time stagnates here. We must surely have retired to rest at 8. "Always 9 in winter, and always rise at 4, said my host, suppressing a groan, and, as I fancied, by the motion of his shadow's arm, dashing a tear from his eyes. "Mr. Lockwood," he added, "you may go into my room. You'll only be in the way coming downstairs so early, and your childish outcry has sent sleep to the devil for me." "And for me, too," I replied. "I'll walk in the yard till daylight, and then I'll be off, and you need not dread a repetition of my intrusion. I am now quite cured of seeking pleasure in society, be it country or town. A sensible man ought to find sufficient company in himself." "Delightful company," muttered Heathcliff. "Take the candle and go where you please. I shall join you directly. Keep out of the yard, though. The dogs are unchained. And the house. Juno mounts sentinel there. And, nay, you can only ramble about the steps and passages. But away with you. I'll come in 2 minutes." I obeyed so far as to quit the chamber. When, ignorant where the narrow lobbies led, I stood still, and was witness involuntarily to a piece of superstition on the part of my landlord which belied, oddly, his apparent sense. He got onto the bed and wrenched open the lattice, bursting as he pulled at it into an uncontrollable passion of tears. "Come in! Come in!" he sobbed. "Kathy, do come! Oh, do! Once more! Oh, my heart's darling! Hear me this time, Catherine, at last!" The spectre showed a spectre's ordinary caprice. It gave no sign of being, but the snow and wind whirled wildly through, even reaching my station and blowing out the light. There was such anguish in the gush of grief that accompanied this raving that my compassion made me overlook its folly, and I drew off, half angry to have listened at all, and vexed at having related my ridiculous nightmare, since it produced that agony, though why was beyond my comprehension.